Where does your sense of self truly begin? Not your thoughts, not your memories, but that deeper feeling of who you are. Jung discovered something remarkable. We don't start as blank slates. We're born carrying ancient patterns in our unconscious mind, and the most powerful of these is the mother archetype. Think about it. Before you had language, before you had conscious thoughts, you had a relationship with the maternal. This primal connection didn't disappear as you grew up. It went underground, where it continues to influence every relationship, every fear, and every dream you have. Picture this. Somewhere deep in your mind lies a hidden chamber that you've never consciously entered, but that shapes every thought you have. This chamber exists in what Jung called the collective unconscious, a layer of your psyche that runs deeper than your personal memories or individual experiences. Most people walk through life completely unaware that this chamber even exists, yet it operates like a control room, sending signals that influence your emotions, your choices, and your relationships every single day. Think about how a tree grows. What you see above ground represents your conscious mind, your thoughts, your decisions, your daily awareness. But beneath the surface lies a vast root system that actually determines the tree's health, its direction of growth, and its ability to survive storms. Your unconscious mind works the same way. It carries invisible blueprints that were written into human nature long before you were born, patterns that have repeated across cultures and centuries because they represent fundamental aspects of being human. Most people live their entire lives controlled by these patterns without ever recognizing their power. They make choices, thinking they're acting from pure free will, not realizing that ancient templates are guiding their decisions. They fall into the same relationship patterns repeatedly, wondering why they keep attracting the wrong people, or why they always end up feeling trapped in familiar emotional cycles. They experience fears and desires that seem to come from nowhere, never understanding that these responses are rooted in archetypal patterns that exist in all human beings. Jung discovered something remarkable about these patterns. He found that certain images, symbols, and emotional responses appear in every culture throughout history, even when those cultures had no contact with each other. The mother figure, for example, shows up in every mythology, every religion, and every story tradition across the world. This isn't coincidence. It reveals that we carry these patterns as part of our psychological inheritance, like an underground river that feeds everything above ground. This underground river of the unconscious doesn't just contain random images or memories. It carries what Jung called archetypes, fundamental patterns of human experience that act like invisible architects designing your emotional responses. When you meet someone new and instantly feel comfortable or uneasy, when you're drawn to certain types of people or situations, when you react strongly to particular stories or symbols, you're experiencing the influence of these archetypal patterns. The mother archetype stands as perhaps the most powerful of all these patterns because it represents your very first template for relationship and safety. Before you learned language, before you developed conscious thought, you experienced what it meant to be cared for or neglected, protected or abandoned, nurtured or criticized. This primal experience didn't fade away as you grew older. Instead, it went underground and became the foundation upon which all your other relationships are built. Consider how this works in practice. The way you respond to authority figures, your capacity for trust, your ability to ask for help, your comfort with intimacy. All of these traces back to your earliest experiences with the maternal. But here's what makes this truly profound. You're not just influenced by your actual relationship with your mother. You're also shaped by the archetypal mother pattern that exists in the collective unconscious, a pattern that carries both the potential for ultimate nurturing and ultimate destruction. These archetypal patterns function like programs running in the background of your consciousness. They process information, make evaluations, and trigger responses faster than your conscious mind can even register what's happening. When you walk into a room and immediately sense whether it feels safe or threatening, when you meet someone and intuitively know whether you can trust them, when you're drawn to comfort others or find yourself seeking their approval, the mother archetype is operating through you. The most fascinating aspect of archetypal patterns is that they contain both creative and destructive potential. The same maternal energy that can nurture and protect can also smother and control. The same pattern that drives you to care for others can trap you in codependent relationships. The same archetype that gives you the capacity for unconditional love can also make you vulnerable to manipulation or abuse. Jung understood that these patterns aren't inherently good or bad. They're neutral forces that can manifest in healthy or unhealthy ways, depending on your level of consciousness about them. When you remain unaware of archetypal influences, they tend to control you from the shadows, creating repetitive patterns that feel beyond your control. But when you begin to recognize these influences, something remarkable happens. You gain the ability to work with them consciously, rather than being unconsciously controlled by them. Understanding this hidden influence represents the first step towards psychological freedom. Not freedom from the archetypes. That's impossible because they're built into human nature itself, but freedom to choose how you express these patterns in your life. Instead of being unconsciously driven by the need for maternal approval, or unconsciously recreating childhood dynamics in your adult relationships, you can begin to recognize when these patterns are active and make conscious choices about how to respond. The key to unlocking this awareness lies in recognizing that every person you meet, every situation that triggers strong emotions, and every relationship pattern that repeats in your life offers clues about which archetypal patterns are operating within you. Your reactions reveal the invisible architecture of your unconscious mind, showing you exactly which archetypal energies are shaping your experience. But what happens when you trace this particular pattern back to its source in your earliest experiences? What happens when you begin to examine not just your relationship with your actual mother, but your relationship with the archetypal mother that lives within your own psyche? Before you had words, before you had thoughts, you had your first relationship. And it wasn't really with a person, but with an experience of being held or not held. This primal encounter happened in the space between breath and heartbeat, in those early moments when your nervous system was learning what safety felt like. Your brain was recording everything: the rhythm of breathing against your chest, the quality of touch, the tone of voice, the speed of response when you cried. These weren't just memories being formed. They were templates being written into your unconscious mind that would shape every relationship you'd ever have. Think about what this means. Your first experience of connection created an internal working model that operates like a silent algorithm, processing every new relationship through the lens of that original encounter. This template doesn't just influence your romantic relationships or your friendships. It determines how you respond to authority figures, how comfortable you feel asking for help, whether you expect people to be available when you need them, and how you interpret silence or distance from others. The fascinating part is that this template operates completely outside your conscious awareness, yet it determines who you trust and who you fear with startling precision. This earliest maternal relationship becomes internalized as an inner voice that either nurtures or criticizes. When you're facing a challenge, There's a voice inside you that either says, "You can handle this," or "You're not capable." When you make a mistake, something inside you either offers compassion or harsh judgment. When you're considering a risk, an internal presence either encourages you to try or warns you that you'll fail. Most people assume this inner voice represents their own thoughts, but Jung recognized that it often carries the emotional tone and attitude of their earliest caregiver. Research on attachment patterns reveals how these early templates persist throughout life with remarkable consistency. Children who experience consistent, responsive caregiving develop what researchers call secure attachment. They grow up expecting relationships to be generally safe and supportive. Their internal template tells them that people can be trusted, that expressing needs will lead to care, and that temporary separation doesn't mean abandonment. This template follows them into adulthood, making them more likely to form stable, satisfying relationships. But children who experience inconsistent, neglectful, or overwhelming caregiving develop different templates. Some become anxiously attached, constantly seeking reassurance because their internal template learned that love might disappear without warning. Others develop avoidant attachment, keeping emotional distance because their template learned that depending on others leads to disappointment or pain. The remarkable thing is how these patterns show up decades later in adult relationships, often in ways that seem completely unrelated to childhood experiences. Consider how people unconsciously recreate their earliest relational dynamics in adult relationships. Someone whose mother was emotionally unavailable might find themselves repeatedly attracted to partners who seem interested but then become distant. Someone whose mother was overprotective might consistently choose partners who try to control them, or they might rebel by choosing partners who are completely unreliable. Someone whose mother was critical might marry someone who constantly finds fault with them, or they might become the critical partner themselves. These patterns repeat because the unconscious mind is trying to resolve the original relationship, to finally get it right. The profound truth is that we carry our mother within us as both protector and potential saboteur. This internalized maternal presence can offer comfort during difficult times, providing an inner sense of security and worth. But it can also become a source of self-criticism, perfectionism, or emotional paralysis. The same internal voice that once promised, "I'll take care of you," can transform into, "You can't survive without me," or "You're not good enough on your own." This internal maternal figure can protect you from taking risks that might lead to growth, or it can push you toward relationships that recreate familiar patterns of dysfunction. Jung understood that this inner maternal presence has multiple faces, each carrying different aspects of the archetypal mother. Sometimes it appears as the nurturing provider who offers unconditional love and support. Other times, it manifests as the overprotective guardian who tries to keep you safe by preventing you from taking necessary risks. It can show up as the wise teacher who helps you learn from experience, or as the demanding critic who insists you meet impossible standards. Most people only recognize one or two of these faces, remaining unconscious of the others that continue to influence their behavior from the shadows. The internal maternal voice also carries cultural and generational patterns that extend far beyond your individual experience. It holds the fears, hopes, and survival strategies of previous generations. A mother who lived through economic hardship might pass down an internal voice that says, "There's never enough," even if you grow up in abundance. A mother who sacrificed her own dreams might create an internal voice that either pushes you to achieve everything she couldn't or makes you feel guilty for pursuing your own ambitions. These generational patterns operate through the archetypal mother, connecting you to ancestral experiences that predate your conscious awareness. Recognizing this internal maternal voice becomes the key to understanding your deepest motivations. When you can identify which aspect of the internal mother is speaking at any given moment, you gain the power to choose whether to follow its guidance or to respond from a different part of yourself. Instead of being unconsciously driven by the need to please an internal critic or to avoid risks that might disappoint an internal protector, you can begin to have a conscious relationship with these archetypal energies. The process of recognition begins with paying attention to your automatic reactions in relationships. Notice when you feel triggered by someone's tone of voice, when you assume rejection before it actually happens, or when you find yourself taking care of others at the expense of your own needs. These moments reveal which aspects of your internal maternal template are active, showing you exactly how your earliest relationship continues to shape your adult experience. But this archetypal mother has both light and shadow aspects that most people never recognize. And understanding this duality reveals something even more profound about the forces operating within your psyche. Imagine discovering that the same force within you that offers comfort and protection also has the power to consume and control. This is the shocking reality of the mother archetype that most people never recognize. Jung understood that archetypes don't come in simple, one-dimensional forms. They carry within them both light and shadow, creation and destruction, nurturing and devouring. The mother archetype embodies this duality more powerfully than perhaps any other psychological pattern, appearing in what Jung described as an almost infinite variety of forms, both positive and negative. Think about the images that represent motherhood in our culture. We see the Virgin Mary, serene and loving, offering unconditional acceptance and grace. We see the devoted mother who sacrifices everything for her children, the wise woman who guides with gentle wisdom, the nurturing presence that makes everything feel safe and whole. These represent the positive aspects of the mother archetype, encompassing what Jung called maternal solicitude, sympathy, wisdom, and the nurturing power of the feminine, fostering growth and fertility. But this is only half the story. The same archetypal force that creates and nurtures also has the capacity to devour and destroy. Jung recognized that the negative aspects of the mother archetype can manifest as anything secret, hidden, dark, devouring, or terrifying, representing the abyss, the world of the dead, and the inescapable forces of fate. This isn't theoretical psychology. This is the lived experience of anyone who has felt smothered by overprotection, consumed by someone else's needs, or trapped in a relationship where love became a form of control. Most people only recognize one face of this archetype while being unconsciously controlled by the other. They see either the loving mother or the terrible mother, but they can't hold both images simultaneously. This split creates massive blind spots in their psychological awareness. Someone might idealize their mother, while unconsciously recreating destructive patterns from their childhood. Another person might demonize maternal figures, while secretly craving the nurturing they never received. Both responses represent an attempt to avoid confronting the full complexity of the archetypal mother. Consider how this duality appears in mythological and religious traditions across cultures. The Virgin Mary, who represents ultimate maternal love and compassion, also appears in medieval allegories as the instrument of suffering, connected to the cross that would ultimately crucify her son. The same figure embodies both salvation and sacrifice, both nurturing and the acceptance of ultimate loss. This paradox isn't a contradiction. It's a recognition that the deepest forms of love often require the capacity to let go, to allow suffering, to accept what cannot be changed. Even more striking is the figure of Kali in Indian philosophy, whom Jung described as the loving and terrible mother. Kali represents both creation and destruction, life and death, simultaneously. She is depicted as both the nurturing mother who protects her children and the fierce destroyer who devours what no longer serves life. This isn't two different goddesses. This is one archetypal figure that contains both aspects within herself, representing the understanding that creation and destruction are inseparable aspects of the same life force. These symbolic representations reveal something profound about the nature of archetypal patterns. Jung emphasized that archetypes inherently contain their opposites. You can't have pure nurturing without the capacity for boundaries. You can't have protection without the potential for overprotection. You can't have love without the possibility of loss. The nurturing aspect of the mother archetype can become overprotective, preventing growth and independence. The protective aspect can become possessive, turning love into a form of control that suffocates rather than supports. This archetypal duality shows up in everyday relationships in ways that most people never recognize. A mother who can't let her adult children make their own mistakes is expressing the devouring aspect of the archetype disguised as love. A partner who needs to know your every move and decision is channeling the controlling face of the maternal, claiming protection while actually exercising dominance. A friend who always wants to solve your problems for you is expressing the overprotective shadow that prevents you from developing your own strength. The shadow side of the mother archetype appears in figures that cultures have recognized for thousands of years. The witch who lures children into her house represents the false nurturing that actually consumes. The dragon that hoards treasure represents the possessive aspect that keeps good things from flowing freely. The grave represents the ultimate devouring, the return to the earth that gives life meaning through its inevitability. These aren't just scary stories. They're psychological truths about the potential for destruction that exists within the same archetypal pattern that creates and nurtures. People either idealize or demonize maternal figures to avoid confronting this complexity, because accepting the duality requires a level of psychological maturity that many find uncomfortable. It's easier to believe that mothers are either saints or villains than to recognize that the same person can embody both nurturing and destructive qualities. It's simpler to categorize relationships as either healthy or toxic than to acknowledge that the deepest forms of love often contain elements that can both heal and harm. Integration requires facing both aspects honestly. This doesn't mean becoming cynical about love or maternal relationships. It means developing the capacity to hold paradox, to recognize that the same archetypal force that gives life meaning can also create suffering. It means understanding that healthy relationships require both the capacity to nurture and the wisdom to know when to withdraw support. It means accepting that protection sometimes requires allowing others to face their own consequences. Psychological maturity means accepting both the light and shadow of the inner mother. When you can recognize both faces of this archetype within yourself, you gain the ability to express maternal energy in ways that truly serve rather than unconsciously control. You can offer support without creating dependence. You can provide comfort without preventing growth. You can love without possessing. But this duality manifests differently in men versus women, creating distinct patterns of expression that reveal even more about how the archetypal mother operates through individual psychology. What happens when the very pattern meant to guide you toward connection instead traps you in cycles of dependence or isolation? Jung recognized that the mother complex can manifest as psychological imprisonment rather than growth, creating invisible bars that keep people locked in patterns they can't understand or escape. This isn't about obvious dysfunction or dramatic trauma. This is about subtle psychological prisons that feel normal, even comfortable, because they're so familiar. Some people become eternally dependent, never fully separating from the maternal influence that was supposed to launch them into independent adulthood. Others swing to the opposite extreme, becoming incapable of intimacy because any form of emotional closeness triggers their fear of being consumed or controlled. Both responses represent the same underlying problem. The mother complex has become a prison rather than a foundation for healthy relationships. The pattern that should have provided security and taught them how to love has instead created rigid defenses that prevent genuine connection. Jung observed that this psychological imprisonment manifests differently in men and women, creating distinct patterns that reveal how the mother archetype operates through gender. Men caught in the mother complex often become what Jung called Don Juans, unconsciously seeking their mother in every woman they meet. They move from relationship to relationship, never finding satisfaction because no real woman can match the idealized maternal image they carry within. These men appear confident and charismatic on the surface, but underneath, they're driven by an unconscious need to find the perfect mother lover who will fulfill all their emotional needs without requiring genuine intimacy in return. Other men become what Jung identified as eternal sons, remaining psychologically dependent on maternal figures throughout their adult lives. They might live with their mothers well into middle age, or they might marry women who take over the maternal role, making decisions for them and managing their emotional lives. These men never develop their own psychological authority because the mother complex keeps them in a state of perpetual childhood, where someone else is always responsible for their emotional well-being and practical decisions. The mother complex affects daughters in equally limiting ways, though the patterns look different. Some women lose their individual identity entirely, becoming carbon copies of their mothers, or defining themselves solely through their relationships with others. Jung observed that these women experience what he called a complete projection of her personality onto her mother, leading to feelings of inferiority and a constant need to seek approval or support from maternal figures. They live what Jung described as a shadow existence, where their own personality never fully develops because it remains merged with the mother's identity. Other women with mother complexes develop an overdeveloped maternal instinct that consumes their entire identity. They define themselves exclusively through their role as caretakers, whether as mothers, wives, or caregivers in their professional lives. While this might appear healthy or admirable, it actually represents a form of psychological imprisonment where the woman has no identity separate from her nurturing function. Her own needs, desires, and individual development become completely secondary to her compulsive need to take care of others. These patterns create repetitive relationship failures that people can't understand because the underlying dynamics remain unconscious. A man trapped in the Don Juan pattern will consistently attract partners who can't meet his unconscious maternal needs, leading to a series of relationships that start with intense attraction and end in disappointment. A woman caught in the shadow existence pattern will repeatedly choose partners who need rescuing, reinforcing her belief that her only value lies in what she can give to others, rather than who she is as an individual. The most frustrating aspect of these patterns is how they resist conscious attempts at change. People recognize that their relationships aren't working, but their efforts to behave differently often fail because they're fighting against unconscious archetypal forces that are much stronger than conscious willpower. A man might decide to commit to one relationship, only to find himself unconsciously sabotaging it when it becomes too intimate. A woman might resolve to be less giving, only to find herself automatically falling back into caretaking patterns whenever someone appears to need her help. Fighting against the archetype often strengthens its unconscious control because resistance creates internal conflict that the psyche tries to resolve by reverting to familiar patterns. When you try to suppress or deny archetypal energies, they don't disappear. Instead, they go underground and express themselves in more subtle or destructive ways. The man who swears off relationships to avoid his Don Juan pattern might become emotionally cold and distant in all his interactions. The woman who tries to stop being a caretaker might swing to the opposite extreme and become incapable of showing genuine compassion or support. Jung understood that these complexes serve an unconscious purpose even when they create suffering. The Don Juan pattern protects against the vulnerability of real intimacy. The eternal sun pattern avoids the responsibility of psychological independence. The shadow existence pattern avoids the risk of individual failure or rejection. These patterns developed as psychological survival strategies, and they persist because they continue to serve these protective functions, even when they prevent growth and authentic connection. The key insight that changes everything is recognizing that the mother complex isn't inherently pathological. Jung noted that when viewed outside of its narrow psychopathological setting, the mother complex can also have positive effects, such as a finely differentiated eros or a great capacity for friendship, which can create ties of astonishing tenderness between people. The same archetypal energy that creates psychological imprisonment also contains the potential for extraordinary capacity for love, connection, and emotional depth. This means there's a way to transform the complex from prison to teacher. The archetypal mother contains both the patterns that limit and the wisdom that liberates. Instead of fighting against these patterns or remaining unconsciously controlled by them, you can learn to work with them consciously. The prison becomes a foundation when you understand its structure and choose how to build upon it. Awareness of the pattern becomes the beginning of freedom from its unconscious control, because recognition shifts the dynamic from automatic reaction to conscious choice. What happens when the very pattern meant to guide you toward connection instead traps you in cycles of dependence or isolation? Jung observed that when the mother archetype remains unconscious and unintegrated, it transforms from a natural developmental force into what he called a complex, a cluster of emotionally charged ideas that operates autonomously, controlling behavior from the shadows of the psyche. This mother complex doesn't just influence your relationships, it becomes the invisible architect of your entire emotional life, creating patterns that feel impossible to break because they operate below the threshold of conscious awareness. The mother complex manifests differently depending on your gender and individual psychology, but it always creates some form of psychological imprisonment. Some people become eternally dependent, unable to make decisions without seeking approval or reassurance from others. They carry an internal voice that constantly questions their competence, making them seek mother figures in friends, partners, or authority figures. Others swing to the opposite extreme, becoming incapable of intimacy because their internal mother warns them that closeness leads to control or abandonment. They build walls around themselves, claiming independence while actually being controlled by their fear of dependency. Jung noticed that men often develop what he called the Don Juan complex when trapped by the mother archetype. These men move from relationship to relationship, never committing deeply because their unconscious mother complex drives them to seek the perfect maternal figure who will complete them without demanding anything in return. They're searching for unconditional love, but flee the moment real intimacy requires vulnerability or reciprocity. The other common pattern in men is the eternal sun complex. where they remain psychologically dependent on maternal figures throughout their lives, never developing their own sense of authority or direction. Women caught in the mother complex face different but equally limiting patterns. Some lose their individual identity entirely, becoming what Jung described as extensions of their mothers, or absorbed into the role of mother themselves without maintaining their own separate selfhood. They give endlessly to others, but never learn to receive or to honor their own needs. Other women rebel against the maternal so completely that they reject all nurturing aspects of themselves, becoming hard and disconnected from their own capacity for care and connection. Both responses represent unconscious reactions to the archetypal mother, rather than conscious choices about how to express maternal energy. These patterns create repetitive relationship failures that people can't understand because they're operating from unconscious templates. Someone with an unintegrated mother complex might consistently attract partners who are emotionally unavailable, recreating the familiar dynamic of seeking love from someone who can't provide it. Another person might sabotage relationships the moment they become too intimate, unconsciously protecting themselves from the engulfment they experienced in their original maternal relationship. The tragic irony is that these protective patterns often create the very outcomes they're designed to prevent. The mother complex also affects how people relate to their own creative and spiritual potential. When the archetypal mother remains unconscious, it can either block creative expression through perfectionism and self-criticism, or it can create a false sense that creativity must be sacrificed for the needs of others. Some people become so identified with caring for everyone else that they never pursue their own dreams or talents. Others become paralyzed by the internal critical voice that judges their creative efforts as selfish or inadequate. Fighting against the archetype often strengthens its unconscious control because resistance creates what Jung called an autonomous complex, a part of the psyche that operates independently of conscious will. When you try to reject maternal influence entirely, you often become more controlled by it, not less. The rejected aspects go underground and influence your behavior in ways you can't see. You might pride yourself on your independence while unconsciously seeking approval in subtle ways, or you might reject all forms of nurturing while secretly craving the care you're afraid to admit you need. The key insight is that these patterns persist because they're trying to solve something. The person who becomes eternally dependent is trying to finally receive the consistent love they needed but didn't get. The person who avoids intimacy is trying to protect themselves from the overwhelm or abandonment they experienced early in life. The problem isn't the underlying need or their protective strategy. The problem is that these responses remain unconscious, automatically triggered by situations that remind the psyche of the original wound. Recognition of these patterns requires honest self-examination of your automatic responses in relationships. Notice when you feel compelled to take care of others at your own expense, when you seek reassurance for decisions you're capable of making yourself, when you feel angry or threatened by someone's independence, or when you sabotage good relationships because they feel too intense. These moments reveal exactly where the mother complex is operating, showing you which aspects of the archetypal pattern have become autonomous forces in your psyche. The mother complex also carries generational patterns that extend beyond your individual experience. Unresolved issues with the maternal often get passed down through families, creating cycles where each generation unconsciously recreates similar relationship dynamics. A mother who never individuated from her own mother might unconsciously prevent her children from developing independence. A father whose mother was overly controlling might become either overly permissive or overly controlling himself, reacting against his childhood experience rather than making conscious choices about how to parent. Understanding that you're caught in a complex doesn't immediately free you from its influence, but it begins the process of transformation. Awareness of the pattern is the beginning of freedom from its unconscious control, because you can't change what you can't see. Once you recognize how the mother archetype is operating through you, you gain the possibility of choosing whether to follow its directives or to respond from a different part of yourself. But there's a way to transform this complex from prison to teacher, to work with the archetypal mother consciously, rather than being unconsciously controlled by her influence. The moment you become aware of the invisible pattern that has been silently directing your life is the moment you reclaim your ability to choose. Not just to react or comply, but to consciously shape your path. Yet this awareness doesn't arrive like a lightning bolt. It unfolds slowly, requiring what Jung called a conscious encounter with the unconscious. And this, for most people, is deeply unsettling. Why? Because it challenges the illusion of free will. It reveals that what we often call choice is more accurately a repetition of old inherited scripts. Ancient archetypal energies are at play, forces that speak through us, whether we recognize them or not. The process begins not in theory, but in observation. Pay attention to your reflexes, especially emotional ones. When someone ignores your message, what do you feel first? Rejection, anger, guilt. When you see someone in pain, do you rush to fix it or silently withdraw? When your plans fall apart, do you adapt with grace or collapse into self-criticism? These tiny reactions are not random. They are doorways. Each one reveals where the archetypal mother, whether nurturing, smothering, or sacrificing, is operating through your psyche. Look closely at the themes playing out in your relationships. Are you the one always giving while rarely receiving? Do you feel guilty when you put yourself first? Is it hard to trust others to handle their own emotions without your involvement? Do you fear being a burden when you're in need? These repetitive patterns are not merely quirks of personality. They are the echo of the archetype. And behind each behavior is a deep story, written in the language of your earliest attachments and universal human myths. The mother archetype doesn't only live in your actions, it lives in your inner voice. Listen carefully. When you fall short, does it speak with compassion or contempt? When you're uncertain, does it reassure you or flood you with doubt? This voice may sound like your mother, or it may not, but its tone carries the residue of your relationship with the maternal, both personal and collective. And unless made conscious, this voice can quietly direct your life from the shadows. Dreams offer another way in. The mother may appear directly, your own, or someone who carries her energy, but she may also arrive in disguise, a teacher, a healer, a critic, a caretaker, a devourer. Some figures nurture, others control. Some soothe, others smother. These dream images provide insight into which aspects of the archetype are active within you and how they're shaping your waking life. As you begin to recognize these influences, the work shifts toward dialogue. Jung called this active imagination, a technique that allows you to converse with the unconscious rather than be ruled by it. When you feel compelled to fix someone else's problems, pause. Ask the voice within, what do you want from me? What are you afraid of? What are you protecting? In time, this practice turns unconscious compulsion into conscious conversation. This shift changes everything. You move from submission to sovereignty, not by rejecting the archetype, but by partnering with it. You learn when to say yes, when to step back. You realize that helping others doesn't mean abandoning yourself, that nurturing doesn't require depletion, that receiving is not weakness, but part of balance. Rejecting the archetype entirely brings fragmentation. You might cut off empathy and feel cold, or reject dependence and become lonely. But conscious expression brings integration. You learn to wield the archetype's energy wisely, supporting without controlling, loving without losing yourself, connecting without clinging. In this way, the archetype becomes an ally, not a master, not a tyrant, a source of wisdom, of strength, of creation. When you know how to listen to it, speak with it, and choose its guidance freely but purposefully, this is where real freedom lives. Because they are not the enemy, they are the blueprint. And when you see clearly, you can reshape the pattern, not erase it. You can live aligned, not with who you were told to be, but with the truth of who you are becoming. The question isn't whether you carry the mother archetype within you. The question is whether you'll remain unconscious of its influence or learn to work with it consciously. Start observing your relationship patterns today. Notice when you automatically seek approval, when you feel compelled to rescue others, or when intimacy triggers fear or control. These moments reveal where the archetypal mother operates through you. Understanding this pattern opens a doorway to recognizing all the other archetypal forces that shape human experience. The mother archetype connects you to what Jung called your roots and the natural world. When you develop conscious awareness of these primordial patterns, you gain access to the vital energy that fuels authentic living.